So you're in Puyallup, and how long are you there before you meet your first husband?
Oh, let's see. So that was, I had my son in 87. I would say I got saved in 88, in June of 88. Um, May, June, around that time frame. No, it was earlier than that because I got baptized in the Holy Ghost on Good Friday.
How you remember that, huh?
I remember that. So that's kind of where every Good Friday is where I celebrate living another year for Christ, living for
Wow,
God.
interesting.
So it's on Good Friday. So because I don't know the specific day that I had actually really prayed and when God had dealt with me. So I just used the day that I got filled with the Holy Ghost. That was on a Good Friday. So, um, so I think Easter or something was in March that year. So before the year was out, they had come and knocked on my door and I had already been going. So I remember starting that was 87, 88. Gosh. And so the year of 88, I remember thinking, I wonder what's going to happen new this year, of 88 on January 1st, 88. And then, so in 88, I met my first husband. And we were married in, like I said, January 4th of 89. He still was in the military when we got married. He was in the military for 9 months after, and then he got out. And then shortly after that, it was so the fall. We started Bible college in the fall of 89.
Wow.
So we had not even um, been married a year yet when we started. There was a bunch of us from Tillicum and Tacoma, some of the local churches there. We all started Bible college at the same time.
And
And then again,
I don't mean to cut off the flow of your story. I'm keeping an eye on time, and there's a there's something a story I want you to get to. It's just a
okay,
personal thing for me that I, I so ugh, every time I hear one of their services or anything, um, I think one of your stories is one of the things I think of. There's several people, like three or four ladies whose stories I think of, and they can't tell it for different
mm,
reasons. And so
okay,
you're telling right now, so I'm not trying to squash your natural like flow, man. And you don't have
yeah,
to. You could say, well, let me finish this first. You have that.
no,
You have autonomy here, honey.
all right, okay, no, what's your question?
But so right, so I wanted to know about when you guys met. So you're giving me this time frame. You're in Bible school. Did you know what to expect at the Bible school? You know how there's sometimes chatter. Oh, it's really hard, or there's permission. Did you know about any of that before you went?
No, I didn't. And as a matter of fact, the pastor in Tillicum at the time was very abusive. And at one point, he had me in his office and he was screaming and yelling, just not even an inch from my face, with a red face and spitting in my face, screaming at me that if I didn't start acting right, he would allow my then husband to go to Bible college, but he wouldn't allow me to go. And
Why?
it was see he would never. So like I remember this one incident when we first got married. There was something wrong with his car, my husband's car, and the pastor had told him to take his car at a certain garage. And well, then I was just talking with family or friends or whatever, and they're like, "Oh God, you don't want to do that. This place is horrible. They've um, gypped people, they overcharge, and they won't do the work right." And I had heard that from multiple people. So the phone rings one night, and I hadn't even had a. I think I had told my first husband about this. I was like, "Oh, we might want to think about this, taking the car there because this is what I've heard about the place." And that's all I had said. I didn't wasn't telling him not to go or
Right.
not to do this, or I didn't know that our pastor or whatever had mandated that he goes there.
Right. You weren't
Like I
saying
said,
like, do this or I'm leaving, do this or no
right?
sex, do this or no
No,
dinner, you know?
right. It was just, out of concern that you would do to any friend.
Yes.
Hey, maybe you should consider going over here because this is what I've heard by multiple people about this garage. That's all it was. And I remember the phone rang one night, and it was the pastor of the church, my new pastor, and he's like, "Did you tell your husband not to go there?" I mean, he was just jacking me up, and I was like, "No." I was just so shocked. And
Wow.
he's like, I told him to take his car there, and he was yelling at me and just telling me that I wasn't saved and I need to get my heart right because what the man of God says is what goes, and you're just nothing but a rebellious wife, and you need to get your heart right with God. And I'm like, I'm left standing there in tears, not knowing what I did wrong. I
Wow.
have no clue what I have done wrong. And I tried to explain myself, and he would shut me up. He would had no tolerance with it.
Wow.
So this was my second pastor in the organization, and
So
he was an
different so
overseer.
different for you, from your first pastor.
Correct. And
Okay.
so he's an overseer. He's a district overseer.
Wow.
So he's got to be somebody, correct?
Mhm.
He's up there. So what he says goes, and stuff like that. So yeah, there was. I was at a point in time in my life where when past R.W. Davis had said no, they are all starting class. She is to be in my class on such and such day. I was extremely thankful because then I was no longer in that
Right.
environment of being yelled at and constantly, you need to get your heart right. You're just nothing but a rebellious wife, and things like that. So that's
Meanwhile,
that my
though, there's no taking into account the fact that you're from that area. You have family and friends from that
right.
area. It's almost like their word of mouth is like the Yelp or the Google reviews of today, you know? TripAdvisor,
Well,
whatever.
well, it wasn't like, I mean, I was treated like I was doing something so sinful and horrific
Right.
by warning my husband that I had heard these things, and I wasn't demanding or criticizing anything. It's just, hey, I heard this, well then, and so that was my first really good glimpse of what the organization was like, was that man.
Right.
And that I knew within the first 24 hours of our marriage that I had done a very wrong thing.
Which part? Getting married?
Yes, I knew within the first 24 hours, within 24 hours, I knew I had made one of the worst decisions in my life
Why do
by
you say,
marrying that man.
what makes you say that? Can you say why you say that?
Um, it was um, not that I can really, something I felt.
Right.
Um, I remember him being he was demanding and almost, on this pedestal type thing. And, he could sit there reading his newspaper and snap his finger, so to speak, I want coffee. And, kind of attitude and this arrogance about it. And
Yes.
I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? I
That
wished,
let me just break off what this is immediately bringing to my mind is there was when we first got to Bible school, you had to get permission to go shopping with ladies. And this one lady was married to a preacher who later she left, and of course, and he was free to marry someone else because why not? And
right,
I remember going to pick her up, and I guess I made the mistake of coming to the door, not just waiting out in the car. But you didn't have phones at the time, so you had to let her know I'm here. And
right,
this husband was so doing the same thing to her? Did you make like a child, like
Right.
like treating her like a child? Like, did you make
Right.
sure this was done and that was done? And I wanted a snack, and so she was hustling around, and then you barely know this lady, and now you're in
Right.
the car together, feeling, uncomfortable. Of course, my way is to use humor to get
Right.
over the hump of something uncomfortable. Um,
Right.
I learned to do that as an early age, but um, so that sounds very similar. Like once the deal was sealed with marriage, all bets were off. Like now,
Yes.
whatever he learned or was told to be or shown to be as a, because well, you didn't start going to that church together until you were married, right?
Right.
So you never
Right.
saw
Exactly.
that from
So
your other pastor.
absolutely right.
Okay.
So never. My first husband, his wife, were not like that whatsoever. They were loving. They were supportive. They were always very positive. Yeah, he would preach against certain things and stuff like that, but it wasn't in a dictatorship way, and it wasn't done in maliciousness and really just downright evil is what it is.
Yeah.
And you're gonna die and go to hell kind of thing. And he was not like that whatsoever. Neither one of them were like that. So here I go from my first pastor and his wife being very loving, and I was not even there maybe a year, and then to this environment where it was very abusive, and the way he treated his wife and the way he treated his wife had children, two boys, before they had gotten married, and they had lived in the serviceman's home back then at the time. And oh my God, things that he would do to those boys. Apparently, it
Really?
was just nothing but abuse. Oh God, it was horrifying.
See, that should be a place to me. I have a bad attitude, especially now, about servicemen's homes. I always think to myself, you don't know what you're getting into. Either way, like, you don't know who you're inviting into the home, and they don't know you.
Right,
And to
right.
bring children into that is just so irresponsible to me.
Well, it wasn't so much the other brothers that were in the church and living in the serviceman's home. It wasn't them. It was the
The
pastor
dad.
at the time.
Right,
How
right.
he treated those children, and how he disciplined them, and how he treated his wife, and really just anybody. I know people now that I brothers and sisters that were in that environment at the same time I was, and I'm telling you, it has really messed some people up.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
It's it really, and I think my first spouse, that's what he grew up in as a Christian. I don't remember how long he had been going there before we got married, but that's what he was trained to be. That's what he was taught to be like at a very early in his early Christian
Right.
um, journey. So that's what he was thought he had to be like. Well, then um, that's how he treated me. So was that same type of spirit?
Yeah.
I'd say
Yeah.
there's a
That's
spirit
a good
behind it.
word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a spirit behind it all. Really, it is. And so yeah, we were married for 14 years,
Well, when you
and
guys got to Bible school, like, so you leave that abusive environment in Tillicum and you go to Graham, to the Bible school. Did you feel like you were in a situation closer to your Puyallup pastor or closer to your Tillicum pastor, or is this one of those non-choices, like somewhere in between, or?
it was kind of at first in between because I felt relieved that I no longer had to deal with that on a one-on-one, very
Mm,
personal, in your face.
yes.
Now I was in a group of people, and some other friends that I knew because we were church members. Some of them went to Lakewood, some of them went to Tacoma, and things like that. But we would get together on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday evening and fellowship as couples. And some of the others had young children like I did around the same age. So we had things in common. And really, we hadn't been indoctrinated. We hadn't been to Bible college yet.
Right.
So we hadn't gone through all, some of us hadn't been through all of this stuff. And all the indoctrination and things like that. So I was with friends. I was with friends, and I was no longer in that church environment with that other pastor. But I slowly started to learn that the same spirit and the same attitude was from the very top, from the leaders at the very top.
Right. Because sometimes you think to yourself, "Oh, that's just a rogue pastor that's acting like that." But when your brain finally clicks into gear, I don't know when it fully happened for you, but that's what happened to us. You're like, these aren't rogue people. This
Right.
is the DNA of this organization.
It is, very much so. I mean, this man was an overseer in Washington
Yes.
State at the time. So he was placed there by the board members, by
Right.
the leadership of the organization at that time.
Right.
So they knew what he was like. They knew what his personality was like, and how he did things. And he was praised about it. Well, so and so, this preacher over here, he has this many numbers, and he does this and he does that, and why can't you all be like him? And if you only did what he did and preached the way he preached, then you would have the numbers too. And yeah.
And they're still doing that today. It's all about the numbers and everything, and not about just, do you have somebody loving in the pastorate who really just cares for soul, whether it's a few or not. But when you've invested money in buildings and you have to pay all that, then it turns into a numbers game and flow charts, and
Right.
that's how you're
Right.
judged. But so you get to Bible school. What was your experience there like?
I would say so. Around that time is when my first husband, also got out of the military, because we were only married for 9 months, like I said, and then his time was up, and he had felt a calling, and I knew this before we got married. That was one of the things we talked about was, I had felt a calling to become a preacher's wife. I felt that God, through prayer, was calling me into the ministry. Whatever that looked like at the time, I did not know. I just knew that God was calling me into the ministry. So I felt like I had a calling on my life, and I wanted to find a spouse. My spouse that I was going to marry had to have the same calling. And so, and really, if you think, I should not have married him, but I did, simply because, one, I really didn't think it's because of things that happened when I was a child, and things that my dad told me, that you'll never find a man on this earth that will ever love you, want anything to do with you if you're overweight. And so when a little girl is told that throughout their entire life, it really puts your self-image and your self-confidence. You don't have any.
Right.
And so here I've got this man willing to talk with me and wants to date me. And, I was about 20, 30 pounds overweight. So he's interested in me. He's got a calling for God. I got a calling for God. We both want to go to Bible college. So I better marry this man. So that was my thinking, and it was wrong. And I know I should have never married him. And I knew that within 24 hours.
All right, let me ask you a question along those lines. One of the things that make a couple, there's a lot of things that draw us to one another, but did you notice any kind of tenderness to you, lovingness, just, I'll use that word tenderness, because when somebody's tender with you and just gentle and loving, and it feels just special. Did you have that?
No,
Okay.
I never had that with my first spouse.
Yeah.
Never, ever. And so that's because of my brokenness from a child, and I know that looking back and healing from things, I was so conditioned as a child that there's not a man on this earth that would ever want anything to do with you if you are overweight.
So your
And so
threshold, your threshold of what you would accept was very low.
very low,
Yeah.
because I'm like, okay, well, my dad has always told me this, and so here's a man that wants to marry me, and he wants to be in the ministry like I want to be in the ministry, so I better take advantage of this because I'll probably never have it again.
What did you know about Davis before you went to the Bible school?
Nothing.
Oh, really? So it wasn't talked about in the serviceman's home at all or anything?
I will take that back. I will take that back.
Okay.
Um,
I will give
because
it
now
back.
I'm remembering times. Um, I'm remembering times where, okay, so if you were the example of a church member, the ultimate example of the church member, back in the day, back in that time frame, board members and their wives would go out to different restaurants on certain evenings, certain, like maybe on a Sunday afternoon in the evening after church, and they would go to different Denny's in Lakewood or something like that, and the local pastors and their wives were allowed to go to. Okay, so if you as a church member, you and your spouse, or as a church member, were invited to go to that, you were something else. You were a special church member. You were an elite church member ready to go to Bible college. So I remember we were one of the church members, the few chosen elite church members that got to go out with the board members and the local pastors and stuff like that. So they kind of groom you that way too, is to get you into
Yes.
Bible college. Look, you're this, and they kind of raise you up on a pedestal,
Yes.
kind of thing, and it kind of inflates your ego, and look, because you're this shining, perfect example of what a Christian should be, and all this stuff. Um, so yeah, those are the times when I was around Davis, but I never really talked with him. I never, here's this guy, with big bushy eyebrows and kind of gruff,
Right.
and things like that. He was very intimidating to me, and
Well, when you went out to
so
these,
and also,
when you would go out to join them, was it men and women separate?
absolutely,
So you would be,
yeah.
let's say, at a Denny's or
I would
something,
be,
or somewhere.
yeah.
Would they push a bunch of tables together, or booths, or random, or what would it be?
It would be sometimes tables. So there would be a bunch of tables scooted together for the men to sit at, and then in another location, maybe close by, there would be a bunch of tables scooted together for the women to sit at. So you're always sitting with, if you're a woman, you're sitting with the women. If you're a man, you're sitting with the men. It wasn't couples together, no.
Right. And while you were sitting there, board members' wives, would they interact with you, or was it just the act of just for you to be there and just sit there and like sip your coffee, eat your pie, whatever it was? Or did they talk to you and show an interest in you?
I would would say, they would greet you at first, the longer, as more times you got to go, the more times they were more familiar with your face and your name. So it was usually always your pastor's wife. For me, it was my pastor's wife introducing me to them. And actually, now that I think of it, like, Sister Olson and Sister Johnson, I knew them from the Puyallup Church when they would come down.
Oh,
I
really?
never, yeah. So sometimes they would come down for like fellowships or a special service or something like that. So I
Right.
got to know those two, and so I kind of, they knew who I was already, and they knew I was getting married to my spouse,
Right.
and so they're excited for me, and they're matchmakers.
Absolutely.
They're little matchmakers, and
Yeah.
so have you been? Are you interested in any of the brothers in Telecom? And all this stuff. And I remember one service, a bunch of Bible college students had come down to Puyallup, and they're like, "Oh, the brothers are going to be checking you out," all this stuff. And it's
Right.
just kind of so bizarre and weird now that you think about it. But
Well, they
hey,
did that to my daughters, so why wouldn't they
yeah,
do it to you?
right, exactly. Yeah, so back in the restaurant there, a lot of it was just being quiet and listening. I mean, what did I have to say? I hadn't even been to Bible college. I wasn't even you know, I don't know if I'd even read the Bible all the way through yet.
I
you
wonder
know,
if they had. Who knows?
I,
Not
I
that
don't
it's
know.
a requirement for anything, but what did they tend to talk about? Do you remember at all?
Oh, just really, honestly, just gossip about other church members and who's doing what and issues that was going on in each church with different church members, and kind of almost a council session or whatever. But it was really chit chatting about so and so, and if they didn't want me to hear whatever, they would lean over and kind of whisper to somebody else. And it was a lot of that, just chit chat, chatter, or whatever, some new recipe or you know insignificant thing, really.
So when you would leave one of these Denny's sessions, how did you feel? Did you feel special?
Well, of course, you were the
Yeah.
chosen one. You were the chosen church member to be at the elite tables of the
Right.
leadership.
Right.
So yeah.
Just being there was something. It wasn't necessarily that there was all this like interaction to draw you in. It
Correct.
almost like there's because I know these things you speak of from when we first um, went to Washington, and
Right.
we didn't. We were in school already, so that didn't apply. But there was a lot of talk and preaching and teaching about these groups of brothers that would go out to Denny's and cause mayhem.
Oh
And
yes, the Bible college students,
yeah,
the single men and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's pretty funny. So, uh, so you get married, you go to school, you have some interaction with Davis. I'm really surprised they didn't prepare you for rules and things like that ahead of time.
Not ahead of time, but we did have like an orientation. Of course, I think I don't know if they still do it, but a school orientation of do's and don'ts and rules and things like that. Things you have to get permission for, and now you're in boot camp kind of thing, and all that stuff. And you can't have people over unless you get permission. You can only have one person over, and Bible school students can only fellowship with Bible school students, and unless there's special permission granted, and oh, all the stuff, and you got to have so many pages of notes typed, and you know, on and on and on, and how all the rules and things like that. So I was always thankful at the time that I never had to be on the wall. And
I know.
but then later
Oh,
on,
later on you
fast
were.
forward,
Yes.
16 and a half years later, you know, after a divorce and all that stuff, then here I was on the wall at 38 years old.
Okay, so you're
My
at
second spouse.
school and you learn about the wall, and it's insignificant whether they're still doing it or not. But I did mention to my daughter the other night that they didn't have fellowship the one night because Keckle wasn't in town, or Olson. I don't know which one, because they were on their way to Memphis or already
Okay.
there for that conference. And I thought, oh, I guess they're still doing that thing where whoever the biggest wig is, they're the
Right.
ones that, like, why do they have to be there for fellowship? Why is it contingent on that? I don't understand that, what the point
Right.
is. But then further, if you're someone who kind of has the hots for someone of the opposite sex and you can't wait to talk, and you find out, oh man, we may not be having fellowship for a while because these people are gallivanting around the country going to different conferences.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually happened with my second spouse.
So you were
Yeah.
how old?
I was 38 and he was in 42, around there,
So
when we started courting.
so you're
And
that age and you've both been married.
we had both been married, both had children, had been Christians obviously for an extended period of time, and we had both graduated Bible college many years before, so we weren't students
Right.
and or anything like that. And he still had to get permission from Davis. It had to be Davis. It couldn't be anybody else. It had to
Right.
be Davis for us to talk. And so we couldn't see each other outside of church. We couldn't phone each other. We couldn't write each other. We were it was at fellowship on the wall only. And Davis had ended up going to Europe for an extended period of time, for a few months, 2 or 3 months.
Really?
And yeah, it seemed like an extended period of time. Well, it seemed like that way anyway at the time, because you want to
Right.
talk to this person and you can't.
Wow.
So and maybe it wasn't that long, but it just felt that long, you know.
Right.
So we had to wait for him to come back before we could talk.
And
you
then
know,
that would
it's one of
only
those
be
things,
about how long each time?
maybe an hour,
Right.
maybe an hour. You know, and you can't get caught talking to each other out in the parking lot after church,
So you're
because then you're in
grown
trouble.
adults
Yeah,
in a church organization.
yeah.
What does that have to do with anything except authoritarian control? What can you? I can't even try to find a biblical reason for it, or a
Right.
I don't
There isn't.
know.
But the thing of it is how what they say is, we are just looking out for your best interest.
Right. Because you know why? All these things I've been keeping notes of different things you've said, and I've put certain things in a column, things that and I've heard, of course I've been listening a lot lately to services, but it really seems like the whole thing of Keckle mentioning not going home after getting saved because he might get tangled up. Kinson
Right,
talking about, oh, you just want to go to the gym because you want to see the ladies in the mirror. All of this
right,
seems to be, and I think when I was posting the FactNet stuff last night, I was reading through it and I thought, I think it was somebody from an NTCC saying, I wonder how long is either that or it was Keckle, I forget which. But I know he posted as different names, saying, oh, I wonder how long it took for these people that left to ditch holiness, and I'm paraphrasing, and then start watching R-rated movies with sex scenes. I'm like, whoa,
oh my
dude,
God,
what are you
oh my God.
projecting? Like, just because you want to,
Right.
or maybe
Well,
one
now
person did. What in the world planet? Who thinks like
I know.
that? Who thinks like
Well,
that?
see, back in the 80s, when I was in the late 80s, you weren't allowed to have a TV. You weren't allowed to go see movies. You
Right.
weren't allowed to do any outside sports activities.
Nope.
You weren't allowed to go bowling, ice skating, roller skating.
Nope.
You weren't allowed mixed bathing, anything like that. It was sin.
Yep.
That
Yep.
was considered sin.
Well,
If
and
you did any of
mostly
that.
And mostly, we heard about it. I know in Bible school, I know of one gentleman who took his son to a baseball game and he had the threat of his license being removed. So,
Yes.
part of it is these are our standards as ministers, and yet how far have they fallen, and what
Right.
excuse, like all the people we know who have been in since before we were in, or
Right.
entered while we were in, what goes through their mind to say, why is this allowed now? I saw Reverend Woods with and I care about that thing because we had gone to Pittsburgh initially in 1995, but he was wearing I think it was a Steelers shirt or a Pirate shirt, standing at the pulpit for either a Bible study or something like, and I was like,
Wow.
what is happening?
Wow.
Yeah,
That's shocking to me. That's very shocking to
it's
me.
shocking to me, but see, in the
Wow.
same little way that little things are done and layers are built of authoritarian control, that
Right.
you're like, what do they say about, is it a frog that you put in a pot of water and you turn it up
Yes.
to boil it? You just
And they don't even.
They
Yeah.
don't even know that they're
They
dying.
don't even know.
They're
And
dying to
see,
self.
that brings me to another thing that. Um, so I knew I wanted to leave the organization 5 years before I actually did it.
Okay.
And then what kept me in was fear. The fear of losing my marriage, the just fear of how they were going to treat me and what they were going to say about me after I left.
And why did you
it was
think that, Monica? Why did you think that?
well
Because
because I'd seen it for over
exactly.
30 years. I'd
Yep.
seen what they had done to people that had left and what they said to people about people that have left the organization. And I saw how they treated people and what they said about people, and it put fear in me. And so I was devastated with this fear, this overwhelming fear that I'm gonna, I don't know what's gonna happen to me, because they put this fear in you too. If you leave the organization, you are a sinner.
Yep.
You are on your way to hell, and you have now become the
Enemy.
of the an enemy of the organization.
Right.
And so here we were. This was been maybe 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, before I left the organization. And so it was in a work that I was in, and the then pastor kept making this statement. He goes, I don't understand why people keep saying that the organization has compromised. And he's like, I don't see it, and I don't understand where they're coming from. Now, I've been in a lot longer than he had been. And he goes, I don't see it. Why do people keep saying that the organization is compromised? And I just kept my mouth shut for a year or longer. Finally, he said it one day, and right before I had left, and I looked at him, I said, brother, if you were in back when I was in, where it was a sin if you had a TV, it was a sin for the internet. It was a sin to have a TV, to go to movies, to go to baseball games, to do all this stuff. It was considered a sin. And if you did it, you could have lost your license to preach in the organization. And now everybody has TVs. Everybody gets to go to baseball games and movies, and they get to do all this stuff.
Do they have TVs,
So,
really?
yes, these people have TVs.
I didn't know that.
And I said, if you were in it as long as I was, and you look at all that, yes, they have compromised.
And not
Because
God,
all those things.
not the Bible, it's their man-made doctrines.
Correct. It has nothing to do with God. It's their man-made doctrines.
Yep.
I said, because back when I was first starting, that was all considered a sin.
Yep.
And now everybody gets to do it. It's no longer a sin. So yeah, they have compromised.
Right. Very much so.
Very much so.
Right. For any preacher now to say over the pulpit, Kinson has done it, Keckle has done it, Gandy has done it, to mention, yeah, I was just looking at these videos on either Facebook or YouTube, and I'm like, when would that ever happen? It was called the Sinnernet when we were in.
Exactly.
It was the Sinnernet.
It was called it was called the Devil Vision, was
Yep.
the TV.
Yep.
Devil Vision, the Sinnernet.
Yep.
And when Facebook came out, they had some name for that too,
Of course.
but I can't remember what it was. Yeah.
Well,
And so considering that, yes, they have compromised, but they will swear up and down that they haven't compromised.
right, but you know, it's sort of like I saw something Vic Johansson wrote. He put it. I'm trying to remember where he. Oh, he might have written it under one of the videos, but he said, you know, even Davis said that, because you know, anyone with notes, which he happens to have them, and I'm anxious for the future day when I'll get to see those when he copies them. I'm not rushing you, Vic, but you know, let's get on it. But he was saying, even Davis said, if someone were to come back at him with the words from the notes they had taken in his class, you know, he would not accept that. Of course,
Right.
because what he would probably say is, knowing based on his history of how he's played those things, is that, well, you just took the notes wrong. You know, you misunderstood. Right. Because the further you move away from that time when he was alive, you have less and less people in the organization with notes from that time.
Right. That's true. I hadn't thought about that. You're correct.
And anyone who leaves, that's one of the first things you do. In fact, I suggest having a big bonfire somewhere and dancing around it, but we were too poor at the time when we left, and we were trying to get to safety, you know?
Right.
That's all you care about. You're like, we got to finally ditch these notes, you know? We have to finally get rid of them. But
I had actually ditched mine years before I even left.
Did you?
It was
just a burden.
My first husband, when he left, he accidentally took a bunch of my notes. So over half of mine were missing anyway.
Why did he? Wait a minute. Why did he take notes with him when he left the organization? Was he just clearing out his stuff? Is that what it was?
No, they meant something to him. They were his notes. And I didn't even ask for my notes back because I didn't care, because I was sick of carting them across the countryside a million times.
Right. And you don't have time to read them. Who has time?
No, you don't.
There's no time.
You don't have time. And then if you were so busy trying to hurry up and catch up with everything, half the words, a sentence doesn't even make sense because
yeah.
Sometimes, you have to, I remember at one point in time you had to have 6 notes front and back typed.
Right.
And so you're trying to keep your house clean, cook for your husband, keep your kid going, and doing all this stuff and typing your notes. You're running around with your head cut off.
You really are.
You got classes almost every night, and church services every night, and and all this stuff. You don't have time to breathe or even.
Right, and that is what cults do. They keep them excessively busy. That's one of the many things that they do that is indicative of this group. Let's go back real quick because we're almost at the 2-hour mark. Can you believe that?
No, I can't. You might have to split this up.
Well, maybe. I think the flow of this one, I'd rather not, but we'll see.
Okay.
But here's what I wanted to get to. And we absolutely will revisit the first marriage and Bible school experience and all that, but I was very stunned to find out about that you were in the choir in high school. And so right away that brought up to me the situation. And you may not want to tell it now till you give more background about what happened with your first husband. But I think you can sum up the situation enough to say, then this is what happened to me. With something, now that you've made this connection between your youth and something that was important to you, that hits me even harder with what happened to you.
Yeah.
So do you want to
Yeah.
give a little background, and we can end with that story about the choir if you'd
Sure.
like?
Sure, I'll do that. So I've already kind of mentioned that, my first spouse was how his first Christian experience was with his pastor, and how his pastor treated us, and things like that, was very abusive, spiritually abusive. He would hold things over your head, if you don't do XYZ, God's going to judge you and you're going to die and go to hell kind of person.
Right.
And so my spouse was pretty much like that, and he would lie. He would go to Davis, to Keckle, and whatever board, Olson, other board members he could go to, and he would lie about me and my son, and he would get us in trouble. And he would do these things on purpose. I know one time right before he left, my son and I, the three of us, were sitting in the living room and we were talking, and my son had told me earlier that day, he's like, Mom, it's like he purposely thinks of things on purpose, to do to us on purpose, to hurt us. And I said, yeah, it does seem that way. Well, later on that day, the three of us are sitting in the living room, and my son asked him, it seems like this is what you're doing. You are purposely doing, you actually stop to think of things to do on purpose to hurt us. Is that true? Am I reading this correctly? And he looked at both of us and he said, that's absolutely what I do. He had no qualms admitting to us what he did, what he had done, and what he was trying to do. And it just blew us away. You're supposed to be a husband and a father, and yet
Right.
you have no problems doing this to your spouse. And to the son, bloodline is not yours, but you've taken on the responsibility of being his father, And so all through Bible college, if I didn't agree a whole 100% with absolutely everything he did, I was considered a rebellious wife. I was always told how much of a rebellious wife I was, how I never got saved, how I never was saved, and probably never will get saved. And so I was told this for 14 years. And he would go to Davis and everybody and talk about, I believe, I don't know what he would say. And then all of a sudden here, we're sitting in Davis's class, and Davis has me stand up and makes a public example in front of all of the students about how rebellious I am and everything.
What?
And I'm wondering, yeah, I was sister so-and-so stand up, and how I apparently had done some things, and I'm standing there just agreeing with the man, because he was mad, he was
So wait,
fierce at me.
let's set the stage now. Had Davis ever even called you, like, to talk to you personally, or the two of you personally, to find out what was true and what wasn't?
Absolutely no.
Okay.
No, not whatsoever. So I'm standing there in the middle of this class, and back then, gosh, we had the whole entire classroom's filled. It's not like now where it's just a handful of students.
What year would this have been?
I would say 92, 93, around that time frame.
And I was probably, I had to wait till my youngest, Rachel, was a year old before I could start. But I started November or October of 91. So I would have been in that class,
Yeah.
probably. It wasn't unusual for him to have people stand up and humiliate them.
But so he's stuff that is just beyond me. I'm like, what is he even talking about? But I'm agreeing with him because I'm scared to death, one.
Right.
And I'm telling myself, don't cry, because then that makes it worse.
Yeah.
And, and I'm just like, just keep your mouth shut, just keep your cool, and just agree with absolutely everything he says, even if it's not true. Because if you question anything this man is doing right now, it's going to get worse.
Exactly.
And so I look over at my then husband, and he is elated. He is laughing. He is so excited. He's going like, yeah, he's making the hand gestures, but and you can see he's not saying it out loud, but he's like, yeah,
Right.
and everything. And I look when I saw him do that, I was like, oh my God, my husband does not love me. That man actually hates me.
Right.
And I lived that way for 14 years. So anyhow, we are in a church and pastoring a church in another state, and it was right after we graduated. It was the first church we ever pastored, and I remember it was like a Sunday afternoon, and I had a migraine all day. And here, you're the good little church wife, so pastor's wife, so you get up, you do your stuff at church, and because you got to be there. You got to do the altar call, you got to sing the altar call, you got to do all this stuff and everything. And I was so exhausted and in so much pain when we got home. Walking through the door, I asked him, I said, could you please just make our son a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, just something quick, easy, simple. Just, I can't hardly even stand up anymore without throwing up, kind of thing. And he was like, no, I'm not doing that. And it ticked me off. I'm just gonna be honest.
Right.
He could care less if I was in pain or if I needed to go rest. He could care less. He wasn't about to feed this child, okay? And he could just care less. And it just when you're careless about your relationship with your spouse, I'm supposed to be your wife.
Right.
Well, anyhow, we got in a little tip, and we were upstairs, and I remember this specifically. I was upset, and I said, I'll be damned if whatever, and that's what I had said. And he was very quiet, nonchalant. He walked into the bedroom. He picked up the phone. He called Reverend Olson.
Ugh.
He got Reverend right in front of me. He did all this right in front of me. He picked up the phone and he calls Reverend Olson. And he's like, hello, sir, this is so-and-so, and I'm just wanting to let you know that my wife just cursed me up one side and down the other.
Ugh.
And he said it right in front of me. He did all of this right in front of me. And I'm like, he just lied to this man right in front of me, and he did it on purpose.
Right.
And that is the reason why we had to leave that church work, because I supposedly cursed him out one side and down the other.
Wow.
And I'm this rebellious, this woman who's never saved, never going to get it saved, and on and on and on. So we were called back to the Bible college because I supposedly had done this. Okay? So now all of the board members they never came to me.
No.
Not one person in that organization came and talked to me. Not one. To get my opinion or to get anything. So I'm standing there and I know absolutely everything that happened. So I remember going to the conference right before we had to leave. Before we went back to Washington State, we went to a conference, and then from there we went back to Washington State. I remember walking in the door because, of course, I got preached at that conference over the pulpit. Mm-hmm. I got preached at big time about the women cursing and all this stuff, right? He's talking to.
Yeah.
So I walk in, and the table that was right next to that door was the board members' wives. Well, apparently this board member's wife did not catch the news of my supposed actions. And she got up. She was so happy to see me, and she got up to give me a big hug. Her husband came in between us.
What?
And listen, her husband saw what she was going to give me a hug, walked in between us, looked right at me like I was the ultimate sin, and turned his back toward me and whispered something to her.
Wow.
And she went in and sat down. And he turned around and looked at me and then walked off.
That has to be such a helpless feeling.
Oh my God. I can't. They wouldn't. If they're treating me like this without knowing the truth, if I would
Yes.
have tried to speak up and tell the truth, they
Right.
would not have listened.
No.
And so I'm stuck. No matter what I say or do is going to be wrong.
Right.
And so we end up going back to the Bible college. Well, when I was in Bible college, I was in the choir. I was in all those years, I was in the choir. So we get back to the Bible college, and there was like an announcement for those that had just got back to the school or whatever. If you wanted to join the choir, if you had been in before, make sure you're there that night, kind of thing. And so I went, and so I was in the choir in the spot I always was before, and I remember being happy and excited to finally be a part of something, because Lord knows I've already repented a million times of what I didn't do, and so Keckle gets there and he sees me in the choir, and it was before we ever really got started singing or warming up, and he sees me and he's like, he got mad. It was like my presence there was unwelcomed, and he didn't say me by name, but everybody knew what he was talking about because I was the only one that left. He's like, if you curse your husband out and you curse and you do all this stuff and blah 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 blah, and you're so rebellious and you can't even get your heart right. I mean, he just went off, and very stern, very, the way he preaches and stuff. I have no business with you. You need to leave now. And so there I went.
And so even though you can't tell your part of the story, you have to go because you know who he's talking to.
Right. He was staring right at me when he was saying all of it.
How many people do you think were there?
Oh, it was a large choir.
Just ballpark.
Was it maybe 30, 35, 40 people?
And musicians?
Yeah, musicians as well.
Right.
And so I'm the only one that walks out. So everybody knows who he's talking about.
And so you have to hang your head and just walk out all alone.
Right. And,
was this before or after all the nonsense of your first husband, running off, not paying bills, all of that stuff?
This was before.
Okay.
This was before.
Right.
Yeah, this was before.
So they just took his word.
Right. Because he's the man. The men are always right. Right?
That's disgusting. And you're not the first person who has that story of being treated a certain way without anyone coming to speak to you. With all the tattletaling and stuff that goes on there. All you have to do is be in a good place with the Keckles or the Davises and say, like, this person's doing this, I'm concerned. And there is that happened. I did that to someone.
Right.
I hate that. I hate that I have to have that as part of my history of my life.
Right.
And you realize they don't go check anything. They're just taking one person's word for something. Who would ever do that? Well,
even the Bible says, and they'll even use the verse of scripture, no accusation against an elder unless there's two or three.
Oh, Davis loved that one. He loved that one.
They use it for themselves,
yep.
But they don't take into consideration because I guess you're not considered an elder.
Well, not only that, how old was your son when that happened? Like, when he asked your first husband, are you doing this stuff on purpose? About how old was he?
I would say 16, 17, 16.
So realistically, considering that young women in that organization, as young as let's see, they started grooming my daughters at 12 and 13. We know some were married at 14, 16.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
so why couldn't they have said, let's call her son in and let's find out what's going on in the home? Like, without the parents there.
They didn't like my son.
Why?
Keckle and Davis did not like my son. They had issues with my son, and they had issues with other people's sons.
Why?
They really, I don't know. That was one thing that has always bothered me. These are children. They're not adults. They're going to behave like children.
Oh, and that's a future one, yes. And you know, you can't say anything about, well, no one could at the time about the Keckle son, because who was going to be the one brave enough to
Right.
say, this happened in children's church, or this happened while I was babysitting? No one's going to
Right.
do it.
All right.
There were ladies who
And I
said
think-
that. I'm not going to say anything.
Right.
How was he? Oh, he was an angel.
Right. Exactly. He was perfect.
Yeah. You lie, but you feel like it's a necessary one.
Right.
And it's not because the kids or the kid was acting in a way unlike most kids. It's just
Right.
you could not, you were even afraid to reprimand and say, please stop doing that. Please don't do
Because
that.
if you went home and said anything, then you would
Yes.
be, yeah.
So it was better with a cloud of witnesses, like at least one or two other sisters in children's church, to say, she never reprimanded him, she never said anything. It was better to do it that way than to have the other way. And I
Yeah.
mostly speak on behalf of other moms who maybe had you know, because usually, like, I had two girls, so we would mostly have girls over, but for babysitting you would have mixed.
Right.
And there were ladies who would have maybe some boys over to hang out and play when they could get permission for that. And so they voiced, you know, we don't know what to do.
Right.
Hey, I'm not telling you anything because I don't do it because I'm afraid too.
Right. And I was so thankful that my son was older than
Yes.
him.
Yeah.
I didn't have to tell me. I was like,
Ooh.
oh, I'm glad I'm not those sisters having to go through all that.
But if they really wanted to know the truth and they really cared, who wouldn't? That is the natural first thing to do in my mind. If you're going to say, oh, I'm this great man of God who's in touch with God, you think of God as fair and balanced and wanting both sides. What is the story from both sides? Let's be fair here. That's not fairness. Calling you out in a class without talking to you, calling you out in the choir, calling you out in making a spectacle in fellowship at a conference.
Right.
It's such gross. It's gross. It's really
Right.
It's really gross.
And when I have more stories of things that have happened to me.
I know
or-
you do. I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
will you agree we'll do this again?
Absolutely.
Okay. We're at 2 hours 10 minutes,
Okay. Woo.
and about at the 1 hour and 30-minute mark, I had to go potty. But so I will. That's partly what's driving me to stop right now. Otherwise, I could do this all night. But
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
I want you to be able to present the picture that you want to present, and I totally believe you represent many, not only those who have left and maybe are dealing with all of that after cult stuff. We have to
Right.
deal with, as parents, we're dealing with guilt,
Right.
and trying to maybe mend relationships because the kids
The
resented.
the kids were abused, spiritually abused, and I had shared with one brother who is out as well, and I messaged him. We're friends on Facebook recently, became friends on Facebook, found each other finally, and because we had worked in the works in a church work before together,
Right.
he was actually our helper. And so he was with Adam a lot, and he spent a lot of time with Adam and out and away from Graham in a church work. And so I wanted to let him know because my son had told me, he said, there's only really two men in that whole church that ever I felt ever really truly genuinely cared for me.
Oh.
And he was one of them. And so I wanted to let him know,
Yes.
that my son has believes that you genuinely loved and cared for him.
Yes.
And that you're one of two. And he responded back. He's like, and I asked him to pray for my son and because of where he's at right now. And he said it's surprising that not every child that leaves that organization doesn't become an atheist because of the way they're treated.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, because there's so much. My son, there was so much spiritual abuse with my first spouse with him that man is going to have to answer to God for.
Yeah, you want somebody who you've married and taken on your son to feel some, like, why take that on? Why? I wonder if someone advised him, hey, are you really ready to take on a woman and her son?
Right, I don't know. I don't know if that was ever...
It's a huge responsibility.
Right.
It's huge.
Right. No, there's
But you have, I think I said this to you before we started tonight, in the same way, I think you just hit so many things. The year that you came about, now I've learned more that you were attending church in Puyallup. Well, I remember when there was the Puyallup church, and Tillicum, and going through, you've been on the wall as an adult woman who was formerly married, has a child, all of that, like...
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is, and you've been in, you left, you've been humiliated, you've been out in works with, people who are full of themselves, like, it's just, it's a lot.
Right.
And people
is.
are going to be able to relate to what you're sharing.
Right. I've been in works where my spouse and I were the pastor and the pastor's wife, and I've also been in many works where we were considered workers.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot, I've experienced a lot, and yeah.
So we'll delve more in the future, near future, hopefully.
Yes, and one thing I want to say is, in my healing journey from all of this, and putting things in perspective, how did I get here, and things like that. I'll be sharing more on my personal pages, and I felt it is time to put a voice to this.
Yes.
It is time, growing up as a little kid, you're not supposed to talk about things that your father did to you. You're not supposed to talk about the abuse, and things like that. You're kept quiet, and the organization keeps you quiet when you leave because of fear. They put so much fear into you before you even leave that you're afraid to speak your truth, and because of that fear.
Well, right, look what they do. Look what they call people who try to warn and expose them.
Right, and they'll say that we've all heard it, that if you leave the organization and if you speak out or say anything about the organization or what they deem against the organization, you will regret it.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what they mean by that, but you're already afraid.
Right.
And then it just adds more fear. And, I'm not going to live that way anymore. I'm not going to live that way with that fear. I have been delivered from that fear. And it's time to put a voice because I'm not the only one that has experienced some of these things, and society even keeps us with shame and quieted, and things like that. It is time to put a voice to our experiences and to
Yes.
share.
Yeah, and there's a lot of healing in that. I have to say it's therapeutic.
Yes.
And that's something the next time I'm anxious for what you've shared about your future and what you see it as being. And we will save that for next time because I really do want you to elaborate on that. I'm pretty excited about your future plans.
Okay.
And so we'll, of course, talk about it after this when you want to do this again. But um, on that note, let's just, I'll bid you farewell, and we'll get this posted as soon as I can.
All
After
right.
after your approval, of course.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for
Okay, honey.
having me and
Sure.
letting me speak my truth.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
You as well.
Okay.
Bye now.